Hello, I had problems starting up here for some reason, so that's why I'm leaning. 1 second, guys. I'm so sorry. Why don't you talk amongst yourself for a second? I'll turn the camera off. That was not a lot of talk. Or maybe my speaker volume is down. Hello. Yeah, I used the nice Apple display sometimes, and today it didn't boot, so I had to, that's why I'm sitting on the side. So, oh yeah, hang on. Ugh. This came in the mail today. Name tags for Thursday. Isn't that cool? Ah, Deanie on top, as she should be. Excellent. That was random. So, Tom,
I'm coming. I'm coming to get it.
so for the rest of you who aren't making it this time, this was advertising to hopefully you will come here next time or some other time soon. Let's go around the room a little bit just to ask where you are. So, Ken, you're arriving tomorrow morning, right?
Tomorrow morning. No, no. Wednesday.
Are you
Wednesday. We're flying tomorrow and arriving on Wednesday.
good to know? Okay, so you're arriving 8:20 on Wednesday. Okay,
Wednesday, yes. Flight is tomorrow.
okay.
Tomorrow evening.
And
Yes.
Tom, you're arriving tomorrow.
So about 7:30.
And Bob, you're going to be here soon.
I'm taking the day flight tomorrow. I'll be there tomorrow night.
Fantastic. Okay, very good. And Mark, you will be taking the day train?
Yeah, British Rail. I should be flying in by train from the South Coast on Wednesday.
Yes. Flying in is an exaggeration, but
I
yes.
didn't think flying and
Yeah,
British
very
Rail went
much.
together.
It's slower than Victorian times, amazingly.
No comment. And Fabian, you're coming in Wednesday, right?
Yes, if the strikes are not too much of a problem, because in theory, Wednesday lunchtime, I'm in London.
Fantastic. Okay. Ken, would you mind resending me the email with your arrival information so I don't make a massive boo-boo?
I will do that right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. Right. So on the agenda for today was not a lot, but wikis. Dini won't be here. She just arrived. We had lunch today. A bizarre place called the Royal Horse Guards Pub in Whitehall. That was just very random, very, very lovely. So that was nice. I expect we should also, even though I'm so grateful for all of you who are here who are not able to come on Thursday, but we should probably talk a little bit about Thursday. One of the key things and the reason Bob is here is to talk about wikis and tapestries and integrations and things like that. By way of introduction to that, a little brief thing. So, in any kind of engineering or science or practical science, there will be trade-offs. And when it comes to our field, one of the key trade-offs is, of course, if something is really, really rich in terms of data and interaction, chances are it's probably fragile. Hey, guy, it's where the other ones are. Sorry, I was asking a very important question about chocolate. Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Ega, please close the door on your way out. That's our famous favorite Hamilton quote. Right. So there's been a lot of talk in the community about things like plain text, right? So just as a really brief introduction to set the whole scene here, in XR, the substrate is the entire world. Something I think it'll probably take generations to understand, but we've started to get to grips with it a little bit, right? So what's kind of exciting is if you can put text in very simple forms. Here's Brandel. I'll wind back 10 seconds. Hi, Brandel. Yeah, we're just getting going here a little bit. I'm just doing a really, really brief intro of trade-offs between rich information can become quite fragile, and but we need rich interactions to do our thinking and so on. So there's the notion of plain text. So what's kind of exciting, what I hope I can spark some debate today, is the notion that even in a relatively normal plain document, if there's a web link, chances are it's automatically blue. You can click and something happens, right? It's active. That activity comes from two things: the code of the text, HTTP, whatever, and the environment, which is the word processor saying, when that happens, I do special thing. I have a feeling that can be absolutely massively increased. Don't worry, I'm not winding back for you, Keith, but it's a discussion we've also had recently. Plain text that can do more, right? So here's the whole thing about wikis and extensions and all these things. In a normal academic document, you have some sort of a way in the body to indicate where something is in a reference, right? Like a square bracket with a number. Couldn't we maybe use that here? So let's say, for the sake of simple discussion, and I'm almost done, in the little square brackets, we have the little a instead of a number. And that means refers to other stuff in the appendix. References is an appendix. So we should then be able to put a ton of useful stuff in there. And of course, when you get to XR, that stuff can explode into the space. That's really where I'm coming from. And I think wikis are one extremely boring technically, plain technically, way of connecting stuff that actually has a community. Over to everyone. Sorry if that was a bit ranty.
What I wanted to mention that in our research about putting text out into the world around you, one of the things, the distinctions we make is I'm actively pointing or picking up a controller or something and saying that, you and I want to like expand that or something, versus I'm walking around the room and I'm in my text and I just decide I'm going to walk up close to text, and it's not like I'm editing or anything, but because of my proximity, that text expands. And those are very different things. And the thing that you're talking about seems to remind me a little of the second one, which is I'm just choosing to, because I can do magical things because I can just peer in closer and the text kind of expands because I got close to it. So, I mean, and so there's the conscious, you and I are saying, let's go here versus I'm just going to get a closer look here. And I feel like that's stuff that you can't really do if you're not in that kind of alternate reality.
Yes, Mark.
I just quickly, I've a question about the wiki thing. I mean, I'm not under the bit I failed to understand. It wiki is basically mainly about the ease of interrelating objects. It's just a storage. I mean, it can be done in all sorts of ways. Most commonly, it's done in a database, which seems slightly antithetical to what we're doing. So I'm wondering if what we really mean here by wikis, is it the ease of editing the links? Is it something else? But a wiki per se doesn't, to my understanding, necessarily move anything particularly forward. But that's why I'd like to understand what I'm missing. Thanks.
Good question. Anyone have perspectives on that? Okay, I'll interject really briefly then on that particular point. Doug Engelbart had the notion of X files. So in the environment, you import stuff, you export stuff, right? Maybe all we're really talking about is having a minimal set of information about things that can fit a wiki. Doesn't have to. In a few minutes after this general discussion, Fabian's going to show something related to tapestry, which really kind of connects these things together. So very good question, Mark. Brandel, over to you.
When you talk about we and the web, it does make me wonder who is we and where on the web, because there's a lot about. So, for example, as you probably aware, I think everybody has it these days. on hover on any internal link on Wikipedia, you get a card that represents the sort of this a short summary of it, and that's to Ken's point. It's one of those kind of necessary components of Deixis, where you have, the ability to kind of indicate specific interest that may be permissible to come at the expense of the overall flow of the remainder of the document for a period of time. So that's possible. That currently only exists on Wikipedia, but by virtue of it existing there, other people would be able to, and indeed can do things like that with a sort of a peek and pop kind of mechanism. A long press on iPhone does it, but yeah, like so there's a foundational capability for those kinds of things. That is still different, to your point, from having an entire web that has an exclusive like expectation to be driven through that sort of mechanism, and in a world where we have generally understood more space, then we could have the opportunity to kind of present um, kind of eager and presumptive deixis, where you simply by virtue of scrolling something into view, you have the ability to see those things. So like there are different kind of questions up and down that stack of like what technically is going to be what are the technical obligations by linking in a way like that, given sort of the basis of trust, but also what's the continuity of narrative flow? Like one of the reasons, as I've said before, that we don't link that we haven't linked to other pages, even on apple.com, from apple.com during the normal course of advertising a thing, is because we want to keep people in this flow. We want to have an opinion about the sort of the narrative sequence that they're following by virtue of being on a specific page. So yeah, I'm curious, like, what is the scope of what you're sort of suggesting, and what are the implications that you're interested in us kind of pursuing and discussing at this point? Because there's in a trivial sense, because Wikipedia does stuff, we can do it already. JavaScript will allow people to be able to do a lot more. To Mark's point, whether it's in a database or not, the unstructured nature of the web, it means that you can kind of throw together ad hoc views in a number of ways. So yeah, I'm interested in it, and I'm curious where you and other folks in the room are sort of expecting to take that conversation.
Very good question. Tom, I'll just reflect on that really briefly by showing you something. So for the book, for those of you who haven't done an article, please do. For those of you who have, thank you. I get some articles in this weird thing called Word, and it's kind of dead in this context, right? So what I have to do, like here is Dave Millard's. If I need to deal with this, I select the citation, then I use keyboard shortcut Command Space to lift it up, enter to search, find it on ACM, and now I can copy the DOI on there, or I can copy the citation in BibTeX. Let's just do BibTeX. When I then go to author, I think most of you know I paste and it parses it. Right? So the thing is, I'm probably looking at making text more explicit, because all text communicates. But also, as we go into more of an age of AI, there can be more ambiguity because it tries to overreach. So if there's more literal text that literally says clearly what it is. So Brandl, the notion of wikis is just kind of a connecting mechanism. Because in a way, the web is a wiki. It's just how you edit it and how you simplify it to do it. There was Desert Island Disc, as Tim Berners-Lee, I think, is today. The web got really, really complex. If we were to stay with the early stuff, we might not even need to talk about wiki. So bringing that forward. So after Tom, then there's a few things to show from Brandl related to why Bob is here today.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've realized as part of the process of writing the paper for the book, it's first what I would call scholarly research paper I've done in a while, to be honest. It's just not something I get to all that often. And for the first time, I really used AI in a very explicit way around, especially for the research part of things. And I built a Notebook LM library that had all of the the references that I needed, and added some more as I went along as well. But what I really came to me though is that usually when you're thinking about ideas and information, you're pulling stuff together. You're pulling together paper or whatever you happen to be working on, research. And your job as a researcher, writer, or whatever is to, make that all make sense. I think a lot of times we lose the perspective that this is all part of a web of information, part of a web of knowledge. And doing this in Notebook LM really brought this home to me, because I would basically be querying my library and it would spit out. The problem I ran into is there were too many rabbit holes, and I kept going, oh, this is really interesting. I should write something on this. I mean, the paper could have easily been 10,000 words long if I'd gone down some of these rabbit holes. But for instance, there was a whole section on deep mapping that I thought, this would really make a lot of sense in this context. And I didn't go down that hole because I was running out of words, to be honest. I mean, not, in terms of trying to keep it within a reasonable length. What I think that does, though, in a very interesting way is, think of when you write something down, when you create a bibliography, it's fixed, it's a fixed set of information. But imagine a fluid bibliography format for the future, where you've got your shelf of books, but instead of having to go through the painstaking cataloging and figuring out where did I find this book or where did I find that book, instead I'm just pulling information straight out of the library with an AI in a way that changes the fixity of information. And that was what really came down to me, in the sense that you really feel like you're part of this train or this trail or web of information as you're pulling stuff together, and then sideways. Some of it's from the past, some of it's from the present, and you're pushing to the future and looking at how those things combine into the future. And that is, I think I'm really fascinated by what that does to narrative and what that does to scholarship as well. So that's my quick note. I did a blog on this, and I'll drop it in the chat in case anybody wants to read it.
It's such a core question in the community of what should be frozen and what should be flexible, but also a reference section for a human is a really clear format, but in data terms is rubbish. If you want to make a citation tree to where things have gone, you have to just start again, or have a long conversation with Mark Anderson where he will explain exactly how bad it is. So,
one of the nice things as well is it generated my bibliography for me. I had to edit a little bit, but it was pretty cool. That saved me a lot of time.
That's good. Now, sorry, I'm clicking about because I'm going to show you something. So Fabian, you are ready to do talking, right?
Always ready to talk.
Oh, did you manage to go pick up the crown jewels today, by the way?
Not today.
Oh, but you will tomorrow, I trust.
Hopefully, yes.
Right, I'm going to rewind this, and please go ahead.
So yes, it's a demo some of you also might have seen at some point earlier, where basically we colloquially call it the mess, but this specific part is something that we highlight too often, which is, some of you might be familiar with a tapestry, some of you more familiar with than others. And what's interesting is it is a rather straightforward format. We show the lines there, the tubes, they're basically links or lines between some of the content. And if you pinch, let's say, at the center of an image that was in the tapestry, then you can move it. So basically how to read the content. This one is it's an example tapestry that I believe try to showcase the different multimedia format in it. It doesn't save back to a format that it could use, but since reading was pretty straightforward, it should be feasible. It is also in a very straightforward way, just on a plane. So it's in 3D. As you can see, the hand moves in space and you can move the elements, but it's all, let's say, over the same plane. That can, of course, be changed, can be random. As soon as you move it, then it becomes something that is in, like the post-it at the bottom, in depth in 3D. And the point there was to show an interesting format that we're not familiar with necessarily, but that how quickly can be played with, including inside the content, like here with the other pieces of text, not just as a single, let's say, an export where you have just one image.
Bob, I have a feeling you have words to add.
No, I'm just enjoying it. I'm not exactly sure what Fabian is showing. It's obviously connected to tapestries. It's very exciting to see this. I need to play with it myself, probably.
What's happening here, and there's one more video. What's happening here is that, and it's this thing of Fabian gave me he didn't mean it as a compliment, but he gave me a compliment the other day. He said he's never met anyone as obsessed by metadata as me. And as Mark has pointed out in our online discussion, what is metadata and what is data isn't really clear anymore. It's become really murky. So that's why the discussion of clear texts and what you've done, Bob, with the tapestry is allowed it to be clear in what Fabian has built as well. Right? That's really quite phenomenal. So when I talk about wikis and stuff, I'm not saying we have to do this, but look at what Bob's done. It already does a lot of this.
I can't wait to have this conversation in London. Are we going to be able to play with what Fabian just showed?
Yes, I have two headsets, two Apple Vision Pros. I hope Fabian will bring one.
Maybe Ken will bring one too.
Was that?
I said maybe Ken can bring one.
I'm pretty cheap. I just use these guys.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We need to compare. Exactly. There are very, very distinct advantages on the different platforms. Absolutely. So yeah, Bob, we will definitely be doing that. We'll have to figure out when and the date to fit that in. But one thing that is really, really fascinating from my perspective is I've decided to compete with Fabian. So Author now, we're building the map in Author, but in Vision Pro natively. And so far, I have to say that Fabian is winning. Because even though the Vision OS is fantastic, it is either you're in a room or you're in a fake room. Either way, the background is naturally soft. When you are in Fabian space, it's unnaturally sharp. And for dealing with that kind of information, very often you want it simple and sharp. And the whole thing, of course, and the reason we're having this topic today is I should be able to click a button in my stuff and open it up in the other stuff. So that's why when we talk about wiki, we're talking about everything should have a name or a label, which is ID. And then the really most basic description. I'm strongly arguing for not even having rotation information or scale as a basic criteria. Because in the beginning of the discussion today, talking about clear text, imagine having a bit of text in a document that is just this kind of definitions in kind of human readable form. It's like Bob Stein equals brilliant person and so on. And then separately, you have XYZ coordinates for the ID Bob Stein. So you're able to select that text. And if you are an XR, Harry Potter or better, magically, you should be able to see it becoming a space if useful. Sometimes it won't be, sometimes it will. Somebody in the chat said Markdown, and I agree. Markdown is definitely a step towards. It's a bit ugly, but philosophically definitely on the way.
Yeah, on also the pragmatic aspect for this week, we'll definitely be able to play with this, and that's kind of the hope also, because indeed, like here, projecting behind the screen, it's a little bit silly. We can also see how to share content live, how to annotate, how we project all this. But the links are also there. I think there is like the video there. Typically, the links are always live. So it's always feasible to play. So this one is another wiki that everybody is familiar with, Wikipedia. The one thing that makes it a little bit special, beside the weird transparent background, is it's using a zim file, and it's hard to see there with the compression artifacts, but it's on localhost. So it means Wikipedia is on the Quest 3. It means it's offline. Actually, I'm lying. It's probably a little bit online to get some assets because I was lazy to do this properly, but you can imagine that you load the 3D model of the hands and everything is just on the device. And it was because we had a discussion about this a couple of weeks ago. And I think because of the size, people maybe imagine that Wikipedia is just too big on an affordable headset like the Quest 3 to run. But even I think maybe not on a Quest 1 for the full version with all the images. But it just works because the indexing is done properly. So it's a single zim file, 120 gigabytes, it's pretty big, but you never load the whole thing. Just load the current page, the index to search through. So it also means that we can think of combining what we just saw earlier. So the tapestry with Wikipedia itself, and again, run locally or not, remotely. And that's what I think the messy aspect is interesting. Again, back to the web part, that we can interlink, we can play with all this kind of content.
Thank you. And I see Mark.
Just a quick question for Fabian. With the zim files, so what's in there? Are those XML or HTML renders of the article? Because in the source wiki, it's only the media wiki content without all the many layers, so hundreds of layers of transclusion that goes into making the average file is layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of basically server-side include, and often the sort of the article you're reading. So I'm just wondering what you've actually got, those articles that you've seen in your environment. What are they in terms of the code? In other words, is there an engine in the environment rendering those, or is it essentially as well like a finished HTML blob?
As far as I remember, it's a finished HTML blob. So it means it's not, let's say, MediaWiki data that you then render, because that's how I started actually a long time ago. Years and years ago, I was thinking, I'm going to download the Wikipedia, let's say, as the database itself. And that can become unwieldy. That being said, it's not because it's like that it's limiting. It depends on the context. If you want to do it fully offline, let's say you're traveling through the Atlantic tomorrow, you want Wikipedia there. Honestly, the zim file, the beauty of it, in my opinion, is that it's a single file. You click on it, you have it. It's 120 gigs, so depending on your connection, maybe an hour. But it's so simple. And then you drag and drop, or you put it on your headset. But if you want, and transclusion, to be honest, I don't think it happens so deep in the actual articles. But I'm not sure. I think there are a bunch of links, but not transclusion proper. But it would be.
Well, just to explain, it's not sort of Nelson type content transclusion. So Wikipedia uses the word in a completely different way. So what it calls transclusion is actually essentially what you think of as a server-side include. So if you actually look at the makeup, sorry, I did not follow this with my daughter. If you look at Wikipedia, it's layer upon layer upon layer of server-side include. So all the natty things like little icons and all this kind of stuff is all done essentially. Nothing wrong with that. It's just gets back to the point you're really raising as to what is immediately to hand as opposed to what's got to be reached out for. And my question isn't to anyway, again, so I was just simply understanding what you were showing. So thanks very much for that explanation. Most useful.
No worries.
Can you guys see me and hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This will only take a moment, but I wanted to share this with you guys for the first time. So I just got a new build of this test thing, and it actually uses real documents finally. So this is a very normal author. That's a weird proportion. Let's have fun. For those of you used author will recognize the toolbar at the bottom. So now I go to map. No, so come on, eyes. There we go. So now there is this thing behind, but these guys are here. And I can pull them. Interaction is actually very good. And it can show this. So instead of a laser pointer, it's the Vision OS style where I look at something, molecule, and I can move it where I want it. So it's in a volume, but it's clearly not a constrained volume. And it's actually a lot more intuitive than I ever guessed. Okay, that was the wrong one. So right now I can tap to look inside at the definitions. They don't do any connections, and this is not saved. And this window is separate. So now I could actually go back and toggle between these different things. So that was kind of fun. Any questions before I go out of this? Come on, gotta have one question.
That looks really smooth the way you demo and can talk on this. This is the new stuff is much better than the old stuff.
This is very, very smooth. If the room was brighter, the background wouldn't be so chunky. But this is now that I don't have an interface for how to move the whole thing. But in terms of clarity, yeah, I mean this is tack sharp. It was really, really good. So it requires a lot more work, but I just thought that I should put my money where my mouth is and compete with some of these other ways, because there's going to be so many different ways to interact with volumes of even text and space. This is just another one of those. But you were the first in the world to see it, outside, of course, of the developer.
That's fantastic. You should tell and show your developer relations sort of participant and get and then ask increasingly leading questions about how to do more powerful stuff with it, and that'll lead them to be forced to put you in touch with the engineers responsible for the actual windowing systems that are there. One suggestion is to use a volume rather than an immersive space. That'll give you a grabber bar underneath it so that you have the ability to move the entire volume as a whole, or to construct it in a scene hierarchy such that you have a reasonable point of reference that allows you to move the entirety of it. Another thing that sort of jumped out is that it didn't seem to have hover effects as you were moving your eyes between those different things, so you weren't getting necessarily the right amount of feedback, and that you can build the hover effect size and shape distinct from the size of the element when you're not looking at it, which can come in handy. So you should Vision OS wants a minimum of 60 points of visual space around an element in order to make it sort of selectable, whereas things like iOS require 40, and Mac OS with is even smaller. So you want to have, if not visual, then logical focus areas. Make sure the feedback works. But that's really cool. That's really promising, and I'm really excited to hear that it seems to work for you. It seems also likely that Swift UI should be able to serialize those layouts. If you want to be able to pull those, push those back into a file or have those enabled. And if you
So this is,
people have it at once.
of course, I'm massively benefiting from this. Thank you, Brandel, but for all of you. How amazing is the community to be able to show a thing, and then, Brandel working on the darn things like you should do this and that. So yeah, I wrote out I need to do this and that. So thank you.
Cool.
Yeah,
Sorry for
if you get that out to the Apple community and they get hyped up, you'll get all sorts of stuff like that. I mean, it's just there's all sorts of magic that isn't obvious until you really drill into it.
Yeah, this is very, very true. So I think we're at a really interesting point in time now. And Keith was texting me earlier today, and he said, we as a community look like we're too much, Xerox PARC, not enough Apple early 80s. And I said, what about SRI late 70s? But it's such a great issue for us. We need to do the research. We should definitely be SRI and PARC also. But we should also try to do the first Mac. Oh, by the way, is this not the coolest thing in the whole world? Do you know how you turn it on and off? The disk. The floppy disk comes out, and that's how you turn it off. And the disk has a proper label.
That's very cute.
So yeah, we need to decide where we are. And I think, Bob, you're definitely Apple early 80s. You're making these things accessible to people.
Yeah, we're trying.
I don't
I'm
know
going
if
to show you some interesting things in London that you haven't seen before. It it's a really interesting. The more some of us have been using tapestries, the more we realize we're using it as a learning space, as a mechanism for exploring ideas that are interesting, especially with others. And it wasn't what we set out to make, but it turns out to be one of the more surprising uses of it. I
Could you
look forward to showing
elaborate
it.
a little bit about how it feels when you do that?
I it was interesting. I got a note from somebody this morning who I'm involved in with one of these, and it started with an email that I had written that she had responded to, and that somebody else responded to. And of course, email threads are not very useful. So I put it all on a tapestry. And she wrote back this morning and said that she was blown away. She had no idea that you could explode an email thread in a way that actually made it interesting and uh, what's the word? Expandable. In other words, when we have a conversation, we tend not to capture it unless we've made a video of it. But if you're having a conversation asynchronously, having a space where you can just sort of draw an arrow and say, this is a meta tangent, this is directly related to this, and oh my God, here's a whole other area that we should be looking at, that being able to replicate thinking in two dimensions is revelatory, which is, of course, why I think a lot of us are even more excited about the day when we can expand our thinking into three dimensions, which, of course, is where your work comes in.
There was a thing in computer games, 2.5D. I think a lot of really good XR stuff will be 2.5D. So hanging out with Keith this weekend, who is partly here today, he comes from a graphic design background, and he is excited by all of this stuff, but he wants to just work. And often that means writing linearly. Give him a Bluetooth keyboard, give him a screen, give him a few other windows. It's actually useful. So when you're talking about 2D tapestry, of course, we need to look at tapestry spatialized, but I have a feeling you won't always need it to be spatialized, and it's going to be really interesting back and forth, isn't it?
I mean, at the moment, the shift from 1D to 2D is so unbelievably uh, joyous. I mean, that's the word that people send to me most often about tapestries, that it's a joy. And I think it's a joy because we've never had comfortable ways. I mean, yes, I understand there are lots of endless canvases out there, but none quite as simple as tapestries to just sort of do something with, and being able to do it not linearly, but X and Y really changes how you think.
So I have a question regarding Mark's comments the other day to you, Bob. Mark was reflecting on your interactions and the types of text or information for reading and writing being very, very different. You were now also talking about thinking together, right?
Hmm.
So I know it's just a thrown at you question, but from your experience with tapestry, how is having these? I mean, in a way, tapestry is just a bunch of web pages, right? So now that you made them spatial next to each other, not just tabs, when you share working with people, what are the different kind of affordances that makes that come alive, or is that not even the right question to ask?
It Let's imagine an email thread that just simply occurred in a single scrolling field. Even when you have that, if it goes on for a while, and I want to relate back to something that you said 2 days ago, which is, 10 feet up in the thread, going back and locating what you want in the conversation, trying to figure out how to bring it forward to where you are now in the conversation, these things are just tedious. But in a tapestry, since the gestalt is that it's all there, it's pretty different. The idea of it is when if we're sitting around talking together right now, and somebody in a few minutes will refer back to something that Fabienne said, and that works in conversation because you can remind people, but it doesn't work that well in asynchronous conversation. And I think that's where tapestries come in. It starts to feel like a synchronous conversation, even though it's taking place asynchronously.
That's actually really on so many really, really fascinating because I could imagine even our synchronous conversation now. I mean, when I have meetings with people on the headset, it's not very often. I tried one with Brandel the other day, and unfortunately, we were not spatialized. We didn't, it wasn't 3D heads because we didn't have the right OS versions on one of the machines or whatever. But just having a huge window instead of you guys like this makes a difference, right? And we've talked so much in the community about timelines on and off. So even in a live conversation today, if you could imagine a timeline just like a tapestry moving past, there's a link, you get a little preview, which is like a tapestry. And as you move in time, it kind of goes to the side or wherever direction you want, but you can easily bring it back. I don't know, Bob, if you have seen Brandel's Bob Horn demo, where he took a mural, massive thing, just as an image, and you could move the whole thing by pinching like this, just like you could, like I could on the little things, but the whole thing. So your tapestry, asynchronously or synchronously, just to be able to not, yeah, anyway, exciting. Sorry. Mark, I'm sure you have something more coherent.
Not necessarily, but it's just an interesting sort of reflection listening to while speaking is also the fact that the tapestry sort of allows you, without subverting the original author's sort of authorial narrative, you still have some agency because essentially you can work around that without necessarily having to destroy the original. So that again is to me an interesting conversational part of it. To a degree, you're arguably getting a bit of both worlds. You're getting the conversational bit that to and fro, but you all the bits are still there. So you haven't necessarily lost the original thread, the original author's exposition, but you have the opportunity. So the others in the conversation or the viewer has some agency in terms of being able to either sort of question that or perhaps provide an alternative narrative thread. So I think that's quite interesting.
You haven't lost it, but as excited as I am about tapestries, I do need to point out that the one problem which we really don't have a handle on is how to integrate long linear texts in a tapestry in a way that makes sense. Because I can put a book in a tapestry, that's not a problem. But how do I put a part of a book? In other words, we've not yet made it possible. We think I have some ideas. I mean, I think it can be done. I think you could, for example, have a 500-page book in an EPUB or a PDF, and as you scroll it or read it, the surround would change. In other words, the links out of that text would change as you read it. We can imagine that. We haven't implemented it yet. But right now, I would say the tapestries are not particularly friendly to long texts, which I some that will bother some people more than others.
Thanks, Bob. Fabian?
Yes, couple of remarks. Actually, I apologize for this. This goes way back, like I guess half an hour ago, on Mark and wikis and what is also a wiki. In my opinion, what's core in a wiki is how quickly you can add a new link. How can you have, let's say, a new idea, a new page, new part of a page, and it's not a big deal to add a page. You don't need to actually add the page. You add the link first, and then you add the content in that new page. And it's kind of important because if we discussed about what is, let's say, the web or the internet or how we add content, if we just read content, to me, that's not a wiki. Like most people use Wikipedia, not in what I would consider wiki fashion. You need to contribute, basically. Doesn't matter if it's 1 page, 1,000 page, if the backend is a huge database, if it's like a single file or a bunch of files, the actual detail of the implementation, to me, it's secondary. It's more we collaborate in a knowledge space or environment. Again, 2D, 3D, whatever, still wiki to me. So yeah, that was that part. On also on let's say XR and VR, MR, AR. So I like it. I maybe even love it, but I also have a old school blackboard in my kitchen. I also have Post-it literally on my desk right now. I have a bunch of sketches. So I think in also 2D, I write in also 2D. It's not because we play with this emerging medium and tinker well with it that we need to leave anything else behind. And like one of the most basic way I do it is I take a photo and I bring in XR. It is very flat, but then I can build on top of this, like literally. So I think it's the combination of all this, which is why this kind of mesh demo with tapestry, but with also other content, I think is pretty positive or exciting. It's like not one single format to dominate all format. You were mentioning before that also reading long text. Well, I also have printed books. I also have ink, a bunch of different ones actually, and that's perfectly fine to me. That's perfectly okay. Which all this bring me to, I think, what is the biggest challenge. Like here, when I posted in the chat the filter to import a tapestry. And one of the biggest questions was indeed like, what do we import? What do we show? Do we show, let's say, the first image of a video, like the thumbnail? Do we show the video playing? Do we loop it? How deep do we go in it? Do we display the full document? Do we display everything aligned? So the neurological aspect to it, which we can bring, technically speaking, yeah, maybe, okay, we need the M5 for this, but we can bring the content and show it all. But it's probably going to overwhelm the user. So I think it's more UX and UI questions. How do we make it navigable? How can we go up and down that table of content of that 500-page EPUB, for example? Because we can note all this. And the Wikipedia example shared earlier was kind of that point that we can load terabytes on those devices. It's crazy. But at least I intellectually cannot cope with that. It's just too much. It's like as if you were dumped a whole library, physical library on yourself. It's too much. So how do you go up and down the hierarchy? How do we link those? How do we use, let's say, transclusion for just a part? Is it the cover, the table of content? I think that's where at least I see the most challenges. And I do think, though, it's maybe also the most exciting part. Now, let's say that some basics of how do we actually load the file works, or a bunch of files, or directories or whatnot. How do we navigate through all this in order to make this kind of, let's say, organization of information in space, like bring us new notions or concept or labels that we can build on?
Yeah, I obviously I agree with all of that. Just a small comment from me, and that is, I'm excited by the notion of a tapestry as an appendix, because if I understand the logical structure right, it is quote unquote just web pages plus some of your own stuff, which means it's references to something, right? So, and this is one thing that Mark's talked a lot about. A lot of our knowledge will be external, right? what happens in tapestry is it's stored externally, but it's brought in when you need it. Whether that's a transclusion or whatever it is, doesn't really matter. So I'm saying also you could have an appendix in a tapestry, a list. Maybe you're talking about the book, Bob, that you provide a list in a tapestry that says these pages of the book should be available for reading because that's what was opened, right? So I think maybe all I'm talking about here is we just need clearer lists. That is all we need for a lot of these things. Just don't make it weird. Just whatever you have, list it clearly. Anyway, that's how simple it might be. Tom.
Yeah, I just want to reference back to my earlier comment and listening to what Ben had to say. The sorry, too many things going on in my head at once. No, I was going to say that one of the things we have a problem with is that we think of books as one thing. We think of paper as one thing, but they're really collections and webs of ideas. And so I think as you're thinking about a tapestry of a book, I think it's you may be going at it the wrong way, but instead, could you just deconstruct a book into a tapestry to show all of the ideas relating to each other and to relating to other sources? I mean, that's kind of what I'm trying to do with the Knowledge Navigator, but it's this idea of exploding ideas out of the format. But we'll talk more about that in London.
Something the community, I know all of us strongly agree with Tom. It's just we got to have the substrate be able to know where stuff is. So that's a coolness. Brandel, please. Please, please, please.
So I'm on a slightly different audio. Hopefully this is less incoherent. Good, good.
You
All right,
sound
so
like Brandel this time.
that's unfortunate. Maybe I need to buy new headphones. I'm not sure what's gone wrong with them.
I can on that, Brandel, importantly, I managed to get the new AirPods Pro.
Yeah.
So when I talk to people, market difference. Anyway, please continue.
Yeah. So I wanted to, so in discussing wikis and VR, I did want to show the one I did interestingly um, uh, 6 years ago, which is this timeline Wikipedia. And one of the things that it sort of consists of is it's not a Wikipedia pages, it's a timeline of the given Wikipedia pages, so that you have the article for hypertext, there's the project for Xanadu, there's an article for Xanadu, and it's sort of separated by time. One of the things that is a challenge with writing and books is that they are opinionated about what they're there to do, and the shape that they take is, if not fully optimized for everyone and everything, then at least for the job that the author and the producers had in mind. So coming up with a slightly different job is, I think, a useful invitation to sort of think about what alternative arrangements and how to make use of the space. So, we was talking about those implied deixis of like what you might want to see by virtue of being in one place or another, or how pointing might sort of alter these things. And when you're on a specific page, then the actual links out are visible just on the active paragraph or the active sort of date. So this is all of the stuff that pertains to hypertext as of 1980, a fairly important year by the accounting of the Wikipedia article. And so having that notion of like how you want to expand it and how you want to work with it. The other thing about this, because by consequence of sort of constructing this space and having the ability to add things, at some point here I add World Wide Web, and then so that was on class 1, so it was pretty old and slow to load, but it processed it all and generated that piece of the article. And then I also add Ted Nelson at some point. Then you end up with a sort of a creative space, a cumulative space where you have a lot of different things kind of open, and you end up with that, to Bob's point, kind of complicated set of elements that aren't necessarily completely legible. And I wanted to come into bat for another relatively flippant experiment that I had there, which was when many years ago during Trump 1, somebody released the Trump transcripts, and so I turned them into a sort of a 8-bit video game style kind of representation of it. And the thing that I liked about it was that wait, that having that sort of process of uncovering, expanding the wavefront of something was an interesting sort of way of rediscovering the sequential nature of it. And I would also say that much like Keith, working in visual tools and complicated workflows, having the ability to kind of retrace steps and to understand things like not just the concrete actions changing the state of things, but the changing the state of views is an exceptionally important part of being able to understand things. And to that end, like there's this tool WOMP that I think looks pretty cool, but one of the things that they do to sort of market it is show how sort of the process of putting these things on, like this isn't real time, this is much sped up, but it does show all of the concrete actions that somebody took in order to make it. And I think that that's really great, and it tells you a fundamentally different story than if you were just looking at the finished artifact. And so that, yeah, I could imagine a world where there's generally a greater expectation for people to understand the process and the sequence of events that gives rise to a thing, and to understand it as much a part of what a thing is as the final end product itself. So yeah.
Phenomenal. But before I let you go, I have to ask you, could you show us the magic carpet?
The magic carpet, yes. Yeah. It is after that. Graph paper.
To contextualize for those who haven't seen it, Brandl took a lot of transcripts and encoded them into kind of a magic carpet. And the way we look at keywords and topics and text and all of that stuff is just, this was one of the first things I saw properly in XR. And it's not understandable until you've played around with it, I would say. But it's incredibly inspirational.
Yeah, so this is a just the word frequency graph of one of the Future of Text presentations a few years ago. And one of the neat things about it is that even though a view of it is illegible, you look at it across and it's too hard to read any of the given words, you can sort of pick it up and heft it around as though it's a real physical object. And here I have the Y of my left controller, sort of proportional to the height of it of the tapestry, but then the X is the sort of the width of it, so you can kind of zero something out and really focus on a single element, or kind of be able to kind of manipulate it as you go through. And yeah, that's that sort of that discursive process of being able to kind of look through these things and construct a meaningful view, and that sort of difference between viewing something and manipulating it sort of disappearing by virtue of being able to have a much more embodied perspective on what you're doing with it.
Could you tell us
if there's anything else.
what the colors or the heights mean, please?
So yeah, this was just a moving average of the frequency of words. So you can where there's a sort of a slow decay, so you can kind of tell how long how long a certain word was sort of in play in the conversation. So there's I don't know if I did a full term frequency, inverse document frequency to normalize this against all of the thes and the ands and the theirs and the that's. But generally, what I've seen in this and in other places I've done it is that you end up with words kind of drifting out and in and out over the full length. So this is, a 2-hour conversation. And so things appear near the beginning, near the end, and you can kind of relate them like that. So yeah, but it's both an interesting subject and an interesting kind of view of being able to manipulate things like that.
Thank you very, very much. Ken, Mark, and then I have some Fabienne things to show.
Yeah,
I,
I
I
had a
have I have to run. I'm putting though a link to a really
oh,
interesting
I,
tapestry about.
I had a question for Bob. Do you have a
Oh,
moment? Just
sure
a quick.
can. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you before you go, if Tapestry were living in some sort of magical future Harry Potter world where, okay, I'm wearing my glasses, things are floating in the air wherever I want them. There's no technological limitation. It's a design question. Do you have a sense for what that spatial XR in our room tapestry would be like? How it would be arranged, how it would be moved, how would you interact with it, et cetera? Have you been like, is that sort of in your head, that kind of design space?
We've kind of designed tapestries so that everybody can adapt the layout of a tapestry for themselves. For example, if I make a tapestry with a certain design perspective, you can copy it and with editing privileges and change how everything is placed in the tapestry. I mean, the reality is we're all different, I guess. And from that perspective, we've tried to enable or respect the possibility of completely different mechanisms for organizing, accessing, and thinking about content.
Okay. All right.
Which is only to say to you, we're trying really hard not to put a grid there that everybody is stuck with. Um, of course, as all of you will appreciate, I get all kinds of questions about, well, what about a template? Can you make some templates for people? And I and I throw up my hands and say, God, no. And then, of course, actually, really, the first thing people demanded was, can you make me a button which takes people on a tour through a tapestry? Can you linearize it? And we had to do it. We did it. It's there, but I can't imagine using it. Anyway, I have to run. I will see you all in London, either virtually or not. And I'm putting it in the chat, a wonderful little tapestry we made about Muriel Cooper and the symposium about her work at MIT.
Oh yeah, I've seen that one. It's phenomenal. Bob, Ken, you're both going to be here this week, so it's going to be amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, fantastic.
Bye, everybody.
Um, yeah, see you later, Bob. Good flight. Mark, I'll give you the mic in a second, but I just wanted to highlight what you said many times about the importance of different interactions, but also highlight what Keith has said recently, because he works with grids. When you design a magazine or a book, you use a grid because it becomes, in Fabienne language, a scaffold if you do it well. So the kind of the argument also going on around in the community, should we have that or not? Yeah, see you in London, Tom. Safe flight. Is sometimes you want a grid, sometimes you don't. And the actual interaction to go between them, I think, is going to be one of our most exciting challenges. And of course, we can only do that if we have some things to grid about with. And the amazing thing Fabienne has with these, you throw them on a kind of a frame or a grid, but then sometimes you don't. I don't know. Whatever. It's a huge topic, Mark, and then some things.
So just a couple of quick, there were really reflections on what Randall was showing made me think. Well, the first was the rerun. The video is really interesting. The question is whether that works so well in text. I mean, because you can basically attach a sort of wind it to the side of something like a Google document and just watch each character appear. But interestingly, when you do that, you tend not to find much from it. It does. It's funny. It doesn't give you the wonderful feedback where it's actually seeing something being built. Partly because, of course, what you're seeing is what's behind the surface. You're actually seeing how the thing is put together, seeing how words are put, or even if you do it at WordScope, seeing how the words emerge often is surprisingly uninformative. Not that matters. It's not a negative. I mean, I think it's really interesting. It was just a reflection. The other thing about I was looking at your Time Wiki thing the other day, It's really interesting, but it keeps making me think. Every time I work with time sequence data, the biggest problem is it's all lumpy and incomplete. And so it's really hard. So if you take an article, for instance, that has very few time prompts in it, it's difficult. Now, this doesn't invalidate the idea. The question is, well, okay, if you're doing that, then presumably you have to write attentively to time. And there's no reason why you shouldn't. But of course, if you're not taught to do that, or indeed given you a tool that enables you to capture that. I mean, one of the things I find actually really, I was just writing someone today, there's a nice book about the early days of hypertext, Linda Barnett's Memory Machines. But the thing that's most frustrating about it is there are no dates. You've no idea when anything happened because you get so lost in the story. They don't actually ever say this happened. It's a bit like trying to actually work out, say, even when NLS started work. Well, we know when they bought the computer, and we know when they first showed it to the public, but there's about 5 years in between. And these sort of things aren't captured. So there's a real frustration. So time ought to be more revelatory, and it probably could be if we learned to be more attentive to it. So I think that's what I sort of take away from that. I'll quickly roll back to something prompted what Fred said, and perhaps preempting my very, very brief notes for Thursdays. Something I've come to see is the difference between elucidation of knowledge and exposition of knowledge, which is something I think derailed some of what we've been doing here. Because in the latter, you're explaining you want low ambiguity, you want low changeability, because you want what you're doing to be clear normally to another person. When you're actually doing exploration, you want exactly the opposite. You want high malleability, you want high ambiguity. So it subverts this idea. Another phrase that gets tossed around here is things should know what they are. Well, things can claim to be something, but what if they aren't? So one of the things you're doing when you're actually really exploring and you're sort of mining out relations that don't yet exist in a way that AI struggle with, is that what you're doing is you're pushing on the notion of what something pretends to be. So you constantly want to represent it. As the paper I did in spatial hypertext, it's basically productive propinquity. If I put things in a different relationship, do I suddenly see something I didn't before? And the answer is very often yes. You can't force it, and it's something you have to do to. But one thing I have realized, it is fundamentally different to most of the other stuff we're doing. So it uses space, it uses sort of malleability. And I think what I'm coming to see, I mean, I think it's early, something to dig into, maybe some sort of research to a job for somebody, is I suspect with the exposition, you very often are working at the presentational surface. You understand what you want to put across. You have an idea of the structure, because part of it, you want it to be unambiguous to the recipient. When you're doing the elucidatory work, you actually want quite the opposite. You want anything to be changeable at any time for the need that you want. So actually, that really implies you want to be working from the underlying information, not the surface visualization, because the surface visualization becomes your tellback of your understanding of the information underneath. If I haven't made that too complicated, I'll stop there.
Mark, send it to me. The link that I just shared with you is where all the drafts for Thursday are. Not all the ones that aren't being presented. I haven't gone through all of that yet, but at least the ones were there. And then just really briefly, I'm sure you guys know this thing. I'm sorry, the reflection, but it's a history map of 4,000 years of the world. And it speaks to your point, Mark. But of course, it is very rough, so we do exactly need to decide on the level of veracity required for the task at hand when it comes to time, fuzziness. But okay, now I'm going to share stuff with you. Yes, so this is, so on many of them, you can click through to read the drafts. Alexandra Martin is writing her dissertation right now, so we are not bothering her. She has a few more days, but that's what that is. And we're going to start with this one, as you may have seen before. Fabienne, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, it's to look back also a little bit to what Brendel was showing before, because in a way, showing Wikipedia this way over time is an interactive data visualization. And it is something that happens quite frequently. So here we have cubes in space, which represent the web named colors, because it's very visual, but it's just a data viz. But a lot of I mean, not always, but most often when you have a complex enough data set that is not just, let's say, one word after another, so basically text, we want to massage it, shape it, give it some way that is more understandable, but not everybody has the skill to do that. And one way to hopefully try to alleviate some of the stuff, some of those trickier steps, is to simplify it with a constrained interface with the help that then people were like, oh, it's not good enough. I want it differently. I want more of this or that. So it's the same data set loaded, so just a JSON file. But then you can display them with different shapes, so cubes, spheres, etc. And then you can edit the JSON itself. And as you might be able to see also in the URL, so that's to find the fields. What does my JSON look like? So one can imagine, let's say, the Wikipedia history converted or coerced into JSON. And then in the URL, when you have a data visualization you enjoy, you can share it as the URL itself, as something others can experience, and eventually remix also. That's the hope there, that you don't necessarily need JavaScript or R or whatever programming language you want for your data viz. You might be able to do, at least to start the process, a mapping between your data in a structure that is simple enough, basically a list of items at first, with some representation that you can then interact with in XR.
I want to talk about this a little bit as well, because this is, even though it's not the visual design that I like, it is my dream. In coding, that so many of you do, one of the intimidations for me at least is all that stuff at the top, loading libraries, initializing, all of that to me is gobbledygook. What Fabienne has done here, in my mind, is to take the variable bits and put them in a box that they can be changed. And it also goes back to the beginning of our conversation today of how, if that was a list from somewhere, you should be able to just put it straight in there and something can happen. If, of course, if it's relevant information. So it's very, very exciting. There is more. I don't know why I keep stopping sharing. So just going to turn off the sound for this one. So this is very Ken. Fabienne, please go ahead.
Can you put it to the very beginning, please?
I can try. Yes, I can.
Yes. So we have an empty space, and we have, I'm too lazy to do this properly, so you can imagine the computer on the left is one, and the one on the right is another. There are just two windows, but you can imagine one in VR, the other across the world, on a desktop, on a phone, whatever. So then you can load content. It loads on both. So you open a file, for example, an SVG, here a Bob Hone poster, and it loads on both machines. And then you can say hi to be polite, so you can share messages, just like a chat. So here you would expect either typing it as is, or also, let's say, speech to text or text to, yes, speech to text, whichever, however you want it. Like if you have a virtual clipboard, physical keyboard, you send it. The content then is spatial, so it means also you can, if you have, let's say, hand tracking, ping those messages and move them around wherever you want to. Which also means then you need to potentially, when you look at something, sure the perspective you're looking at. It doesn't have to be all the time. It can be just like, hey, I'm looking at that poster in that position in space, because of course you don't have the same perspective as the other person. Yes, you can keep on adding notes. Those notes are text. It also means it can be code. So if you want to share text snippets, even like the inline filter for, let's say, data visualization that was just before, you could share it this way. And then you can keep on updating the position if you want to keep track, let's say, of a note moving in space, or again, code snippet. So here I'm typing in the keyboard, but if you want to make shortcuts, put them on your wrists or wherever, or on the fingers, you would use those instead. So basically a way to collaborate. It doesn't have to be in XR, again, and I think that's something that is important to highlight. Not everybody wants to be in XR or can be in XR. And sometimes you want also to get the file. You can drag and drop. Here it's all preloaded, let's say the poster, but if you have a new file, let's say a tapestry, then the person who would be outside of the headset would probably do this more conveniently. So kind of a asymmetric collaboration example.
Thank you.
And the next video then is the one that
Hang on, let me just ask a question for Ken.
sorry.
How that relates to the multi-user work that your lab is doing, or if it's a very different approach.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Oh, so for the last few years, we've been building web XR interfaces in such a way that your client could be either a desktop or a headset, like one of these. And so we're just trying to make it so that we're trying to understand what the equivalents are. So I guess, and everything we're doing is multi-user. So I guess in that way, it's related. I mean, we're trying to figure out some of the same things, if that's your question.
Yeah, I just know you've done a lot of multi-experience work, so I just wondered if you had a comment, so that's cool. Fabien, was there another one to show, or was there another comment? I'm so sorry.
No, it's the next one, but it's on the same topic. Namely that typically if somebody were to join a collaborative session late, they see a huge mess. They see all that stuff, literally as you see here, which is totally unintelligible. So really, because basically when you do networking, you send messages across the wire, you can log them, and you can timestamp them. And if you can do that, you can also replay them. So rather, it's a quick hack, but I think in terms of shareability and understanding, something relatively powerful is that you can then replay the collaboration session. And it has basically no costs because it's just the messages. If the environment is replayable, let's say, if it's easy to add and remove stuff, with at least add, then it goes relatively well. And I think in terms again of collaboration, that's a quick win, at least at the very simple conceptual basis. And I think it was important to show that today. Again, there are just examples on how to do it. It's not normative, but it means for us meeting, for those who can meeting next week, it's something to keep in mind. Like, we don't have our tiny isolated system. It's how do we get our stuff together, because we also have like different skill sets, different ability, even preferences. So that I think is, again, like, my blackboard is pretty pointless if I'm the only one looking or playing with it. So it's when we start to collaborate together, then it's much richer.
That temporal first sort of aspect of timestamping is a really neat hack. I think I've mentioned before, but back in the early 2000s, I had a startup where we were trying to have sort of co-present retail experiences, and in order to simulate multiple users, we used IRC as the transport layer for all of the signals, and we would just walk around in the level and then record the IRC logs, and then write the simplest possible bot to replay those logs in the time-corrected timestamps to make them take actions that we wanted. And you could just join the channel with as many bots as you wanted to be able to simulate the sort of the presence of multiple people and things.
Huh, that's very clever.
It's weirdly on theme, but Brandel, I actually really like your video much better than your avatar.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, talking about kind of like deep fakes and things these days, when I make a call now, if I happen to be on the headset, people cannot tell. Casual looking, they just cannot tell it's not me. And then I say, I'm not actually on the moon. Right? It's like, oh yeah, the background is a bit of a tell. That's the world we're living in now. Fabien, please.
A silly comment and maybe a less silly one, hopefully after. It is a funny remark because, for example, if you look not just at TikTok, but a lot of social media, your fake self is your real self. That's how you present yourself, to the point that then you get, I don't know if catfish is an appropriate word, but people that meet the real person, like, whoa, this is not you. And maybe the weirdest part is the person who has the filter might think that's the real them. It is a strange moment in time to be in. For the IRC hack, so I still use IRC actually. One of the few people still doing it. And it is, why do I mention this? Because the thing, it's first, yes, it works also. And I can imagine that back in the day as a proper demo mechanism. But one thing I wanted to do, and I didn't have time yet, and I don't want to do it with Zoom for like all the interoperability and proper proprietary software limitations, but I was thinking of Delta Chat or another open source and interoperable chatting system, so that if the person doesn't ever want to see 3D, but they still want to interact with the environment, a bit like we were discussing about tapestry over time earlier, they can just put some chat, and the chat again in just 2D, not even 3D, not even like a representation of 3D in 2D, just chat. And then adding this chat or drag and drop of document through Delta Chat to bring it to the system. Because I think sometimes you are, let's say, in the subway, you have a good idea. You don't want to load the 3D environment. You just want to share, like, say, those 3 words, this tiny text snippet, and because it is part of the flow of how the project evolves. So I think integration with even IRC would be fine, but let's say Delta Chat or some program like this, because we can also imagine collaborating like this over time between Monday afternoon or Monday morning sessions like this one.
That is really, really important to be able to multimodally, or whatever we call it, add stuff. Now, just to go in a completely different direction. When we're talking about the real you, what is that? Is the real you your thoughts? Is it the way your face looks that day? Is it whether your hair is messy or not? Is it whether you have push-up muscles in your shirt or whatever it is? This is now a real question. Before, the real you is, if you meet an author, very often you get a very different impression than the book, right? So now that our digital selves may very well be allowed to be considered a real us, which is kind of fun. But there's also the opposite opportunity, and that is the notion of an idea of a instant face changing app that only worked on video of yourself live as a mirror. So you hold your device up and you look in a mirror, but you can change your race or your sex or both, right? So the whole idea is to help people feel that people who don't look like them, if they haven't grown up with people like that, to literally see themselves in those types of appearances. You know, it's like a more of an artistic idea, but the whole thing is, in addition to text, the way we can play with our identities, projections, the way we see ourselves. It's very, very exciting. Over.
On truth and telepresence and all of those kinds of things. I didn't go in person, but the most recent W3C um, Olive Group conference, TPAC, was in Kobe, Japan, week before last. And even though Immersive Web, my group didn't go, there were a ton of things that were very, very central to it. One of which, to this point of sort of remote truth and things like that, was something called the cybernetic avatars community group, which is a movement that has been building it's cybernetic being .org, and they are very interested in. I'm not sure the web is necessarily the right kind of framework for it, but I don't think it's too silly to imagine that we are about right to start having kind of discussions about what is reasonable to and responsible to transmit about oneself to one another over the web, they want to talk about things like robotic teleoperation and telepresence, as well as experiencing memories. And I think it's really interesting because, yeah, Vision and Apple are probably, I'm not speaking for them officially, but pretty conservative about what the circumstances under which the sort of the full flavor of transmitting and presenting avatars with the quality that they have there are. probably don't want to allow the risk of those being sort of uh, sort of intercepted and then misrepresented and things like that. But I think that there's a reasonable question amongst all of these things, like what are sort of spatial identities of the kind like I'm in the one on the moon that I had before, um, as well as a whole handful of other kind of questions related to putting windows in space and having windows transparent and what kind of gestures and pointer events might be relevant. So I think there's a lot there. And then this past week we had our immersive web to face, but also the Alliance of for OpenUSD general symposium. So all of the USD heads from primarily from Pixar, but most and then ex-Pixar people around. And then what are the sort of responsible ways of declaring that a 3D thing is sort of accurately representing a person or thing that everybody agrees is that thing, be it an industrial robot or an individual or a scene from Finding Nemo. So yeah, I think that there's a lot about accuracy and truth and sort of veracity and consent that will kind of fly up into the fore in all of this. That like I said, I'm not sure that we know exactly the way the web will sort of interleave in those things, but it will be absolutely relevant as we sort of present ourselves in increasingly disparate ways as we sort of interact with each other.
See, Fabienne, you showed multi-user environments and this explosion. Just really two things because we're running out of time, and then Fabienne. One is there is an article in the independent newspaper on how British authors are afraid that we'll get to a point where only rich people can read books written by humans because they will still need to make an income. If you don't have enough money, you read the AI slop, right? And then there was a very strange story in terms of your online identity, digital information, and sharing in time. One of our friends found out this week that she has a brother. The reason is she was on Ancestry to check DNA for her child because she, when she was pregnant, and you get these updates. So then she gets an update, relation, brother, right? Years later, secret stuff. So you just don't know when the data about you, whether intimate or not, is going to come back in a different way. Bizarre story. Fabienne, you get the closing words, and I hope to see some of you in the flesh, some of you in the virtual in a few days.
So then as closing words, I actually don't know. That is actually the interesting question about using all those device technology conversations is what is my own self? What is my future self? How do I want to shape it? So I think how we look at, let's say, a self that is represented is with a 3D avatar, or even like how we look on the webcam, augmented or adjusted or whatnot. Maybe it's the most interesting question. Why do we spend all this time, energy, resources again to go across the world and meet people? Is hopefully to be better selves. So yeah, I think it's a fun adventure to try. Actually,
I'm sorry, I have to add something. For those of you who are staying here this week, one of our Wi-Fi hubs wasn't working, so I contacted the community fiber. I get a phone call and I didn't understand what the person was saying, but thankfully she had a South African accent. If she didn't have a quite specific accent, I would have been sure it was an AI sales call these days. There are so many of them. So if you all know the culture novels, E&M Banks, I hope, right? One of the things in the far distant future where we can change any aspect of our physical appearance, people tend not to want to be super beautiful. They want to be slightly quirky. Digitally, we're there already, right? If you're a model blandness, you won't be noticed. So on that note, thank you very much, guys, and let's keep going. Bye for now.